let's start with Guanyu Zhou then. When we talk about his promotion to Formula One, I think for a lot of people, it raises a question about, Formula 2 is meant to be the champion of Formula 2, and maybe the guy that comes second should get that seat in Formula 1. But with Zhou, you're looking at someone who has had multiple seasons in Formula 2 and without winning the title, has still been able to put the budget and the resume together to secure that Formula 1 seat. So could you explain maybe a little bit about his history as a driver and why he got that seat?
Yeah, so Guanyu Zhou's kind of had a mixed, say, junior career. He was originally part of the Ferrari Driver Academy around the same time as the likes of Callum Ilott, who is now over in IndyCar. Kind of came through the ranks, won a couple of Formula 4 championships, got stuck in Formula 3 for a couple of seasons around the same time as Mick Schumacher, and then came up to Formula 2 in 2019 and was actually he won the Antoine Hubert Award for basically the highest performing rookie that season, and everyone was touting that he was going to be the first Chinese driver in Formula 1, or the first full-time Chinese driver in Formula 1, I should say. And then last year, I don't know whether it was to do with the tyres or just a very unfortunate season, he didn't have much luck, struggled down towards the middle of the kind of pack. This time around, he had a much more promising campaign as part of the Alpine Academy, had been apart for about 2 years. The problem was he had probably both having a great season in terms of his performance and fighting for the championship, but in the Alpine Academy, he had Oscar Piastri, who was the reigning Formula 3 champion and now Formula 2 champion. And when this is your third campaign versus a rookie, ultimately the rookie's performance are going to be more impressive. And the difficulty as well that he struggled to have that consistency that Oscar Piastri had. And therefore, a lot of people, I think, have bashed him unfairly. When a lot of people go with that pay driver mentality, I think they think of the likes of Nicholas Latifi or even Rio Haryanto back in the Manor days, like people that were never on the radar for one. Guanyu Zhou has always been on the radar in some shape or form. Yes, that money and sponsorship has helped. I'm not going to lie. He has had that advantage over Oscar Piastri, but in the end of the day, he has the super license points. I think that's probably the bigger indication of the issues with Formula 1 and getting those juniors up and promoted is how they operate the super license points at the moment. But whether he'll perform in Formula 1, I think, is an interesting question. I think with Valtteri Bottas, they've got a solid lineup and he's not going to be the worst driver in the history of Formula 1. It's just whether Formula 1 should have, say, a promotion system like the Premier League does, where the champion always gets promoted from the Championship up to the Premier League.
Absolutely, because you can look at someone like Nick de Vries, who not only won the Formula 2 championship, but then went on to win Formula E last year. And it seems like those championships independently are valuable, and it takes a lot of skill to win them. But I think, especially in the eyes of the junior drivers, when you're talking about their long-term dream, it is to get that Formula 1 seat. And it seems like those are steps along the path for Nick de Vries, who is looking to get back into Formula 1. But what can he do when he's now out of Formula 2, winning Formula E? It feels like he's, where's the path back in for him when there are always going to be those new juniors coming through? Do you see a potential for a Nick de Vries Formula 1 transfer, or is he going to be just the Formula E champion for a while now? What do you think about that?
That's always a tough one. I think with Formula E, the difficulty is the FIA's got its heart set on this kind of road to Formula 1, and it's very much kind of like a tree trunk straight line, and then branches out into their various other world championships like World Endurance. A lot of them dovetail, say, Formula E with that. I think for Nick de Vries, the situation is probably his age. It feels weird saying that because he's only around my age, but he's too old at this point in time. You've got to be very much 21, 22 at the oldest to secure a Formula 1 seat. Now, look at Théo Pourchaire for the potential Alfa seat next season. He's 18? He's hadn't even passed his driving test before he drove in Formula 2.
Yeah, like Max.
And that is the strange thing. I think Max Verstappen's rise held it kind of that very much push on the younger driver, the better, but also restricting the age limit to 18. And I can't see de Vries going over, potentially maybe in the future. There is the possibility. The one bit, the anomaly I find that is actually quite irritating is with IndyCar. I don't tend to follow as much of that circuit, but there was a lot of the discussion around Colton Herta moving over.
Yeah.
And IndyCar, despite its prestige, one of the biggest championship over in America, actually gives them less super license points than Formula 2 does. So he was at a
I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, he was at a disadvantage having it does, I think, give a very European centric mindset to how the FIA operates at the moment. Same things like W Series. Obviously, Jamie Chadwick's won it twice, but has only had 4 super license points this season. But then also looking at the equivalent, like it used to be called Renault 3.5 and Formula Regional, they actually give more points even though they're the same cars. And it does, I just think at the moment they have branched it into a too narrow situation where you're going to have more and more paid drivers, because to afford a Formula 2 seat, it can cost around 2 million for one season alone. And unless you've got big sponsors or parents that are willing to fund it, you're not going to see the likes of Lewis Hamilton coming up through the ranks anymore.
And then also IndyCar, it has its own junior structure there, but even you reach the top of that IndyCar junior structure and it's still not like, it's still almost a subset as the European, the top level in America is equal to the second level of European, even though those drivers are not 22, 21-year-olds. A lot of the time they're experienced, they're champions, they're winners on ovals and street tracks and traditional circuits, but it's just not valued in the same way. It seems really interesting that there's this stock of like Alex Palou started out in the European Junior Formula Series and was successful with people like Carlos Sainz, who's around that generation, and then made that decision to jump over to IndyCar and showed that it could be successful. So whether is it like Lundgaard and Eilert, similar moves for them to make, if they can replicate it, it's kind of treading that path a bit more and making it a bit more obvious for that transfer from Europe to America to be made, I think could definitely change up the driver market a bit, alongside evolution of Formula E, the rise of, I think, the way people value Formula E, like how difficult and competitive it is, has definitely risen in the last few years. So I think it's, as we spoke a little bit about at the start, having a wider, more global perspective on motorsport is definitely going to establish kind of a better angle for, I'm sure your writing really benefits from that perspective.
Absolutely. I think as well with Formula E as well, the fact that it became a world championship, obviously wasn't for its early seasons, now has increased that prestige and that element of this now being, for a lot of the drivers, say the likes of Mitch Evans, this is the only championship they compete in, whereas previously drivers used to skip Formula E rounds to compete in World Endurance, and that's a lot less common these days. And then you've also had the likes of Antonio Giovinazzi going over, even though that does end up having the converse situation of people going, oh, Formula E is a dumping ground for ex-Formula One drivers. Actually, I would argue that sometimes you don't tend to see a pay driver situation in Formula E in the same way you do in Formula One. But then with IndyCar as well, I think definitely with the likes of Lundgaard and Eilert going over, it presents an incredibly important and potential opportunity for them to pass back into Formula One. I think the actual one to definitely keep an eye on is Arrow McLaren's Pato O'Ward, because he did the Abu Dhabi test. Absolutely. And with the situation of whether Ricciardo will stay beyond his contract, who knows, will that be a potential new lineup for McLaren, because they currently don't really have a junior team, and the same with the likes of Red Bull and Mercedes do.
I think, well, I mean, also with the commercialization of Formula One in America, I think we spoke about with Zhou, the economic side of the sport. With someone like O'Ward, he is his own driver and has his own success. He doesn't need to pay for a seat at all. But I think the way McLaren, how successful they've been with marketing Lando, he's one of the most popular drivers on the grid. In 3 years, he's more popular than some of the veterans. If they can bring in a Mexican-American driver that's going to appeal hugely to the American market, I mean, that's a huge step for McLaren. I think to be with Zach as well, to take advantage of that side of the sport and integrate their IndyCar and their Formula One team. I mean, we've seen with the liveries, right? They've looked to integrate those, especially with Extreme E as well. Integrating that and creating that kind of global motorsport team across categories, it could be really valuable for McLaren.